Balfour vs. Balfour year is a landmark English contract law case decided by the Court of Appeal in 1919. It is significant for its ruling on the enforceability of agreements made between spouses. Here are the key details and implications of the case. Duxark, facts, parties, Mr. Balfour, defendant, and Mrs. Balfour, plaintiff. Background: Mr. Balfour was a civil engineer who worked for the government of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. He and Mrs. Balfour lived together in Ceylon. In 1915, they traveled to England on leave. Due to Mrs. Balfour's health issues, she stayed in England while Mr. Balfour returned to Ceylon. Agreement: Mr. Balfour agreed to send Mrs. Balfour $30 per month as maintenance until she could rejoin him in Ceylon. Later, the relationship deteriorated, and Mr. Balfour stopped sending the money. Mrs. Balfour sued for the promised payments. Issues: The main issue was whether the agreement between Mr. and Mrs. Balfour was a legally binding contract that could be enforced by the courts. Judgment: Court of Appeal. Judges: Lord Justice Atkin, Lord Justice Warrington, and Lord Justice Duke. Decision: The court ruled in favor of Mr. Balfour, stating that the agreement was not legally binding. Legal reasoning. 1. Intention to create legal relations. The court held that agreements between spouses are generally not intended to create legal relations unless there is clear evidence to the contrary. Such agreements are typically made in the context of a personal relationship and are based on mutual trust and confidence, not legal obligation. 2. Domestic agreements. Lord Justice Atkin emphasized that domestic agreements, such as those between husband and wife, do not usually result in legal contracts enforceable by the courts. This is because the parties do not intend for their personal arrangements to be subject to legal adjudication. 3. Consideration. The court also considered whether there was valid consideration for the promise. However, the primary basis for the decision was the lack of intent